Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Did Jesus suffer the wrath of the Father for all sinners or just for the elect? Scary question, I know, but the answer is pretty simple. Just for the elect. This truth is hard for some people for what seems like a good reason. It shows God treating people unequally. If Christ's atoning work covers only some people, doesn't this somehow make God unfair, treating one group of people one way and another group of people another way? If people end up in different places, some in heaven and some in hell, then we can either attribute the difference to how God acts in our lives or how we act in ourselves. The latter choice has a great deal going for it. It absolves God of the charge of treating people differently. And no one in hell, of course, can complain about being there. They are there by their own doing. The first choice, however, has three things going better for it. First, it means some people will actually go to heaven. Given the scope of our sinfulness, were God merely to make our salvation possible, which, by the way, is itself a limitation of the atonement, and to make it then dependent upon our natural obedience to his call, none would come. Dead people do not respond to the call to repentance unless they are first made alive. The second advantage is that this is what the Bible teaches. Consider, for instance, Jesus' high priestly prayer. If it is incumbent upon God to treat all men the same, would it not be incumbent on Jesus to pray for all men the same way? What then are we to make of this? I pray for them. I do not pray for the world, but for those whom you have given me, for they are yours. That's Jesus praying in John 17, verse 9. Jesus explicitly denies praying for those who are not his, while affirming that he prays for those who are his. Now, if Jesus is unwilling to pray for those who were not chosen, on what grounds can we claim that he suffered the wrath of the Father for the sins of those for whom he would not pray? Remember that God himself explicitly affirms his liberty to treat some people differently than others. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whomever I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whomever I will have compassion. That's Romans 9:15. What we try to free God from, the accusation that he treats some people one way and others another, God proudly affirms. Third, there is another serious problem with the idea that Jesus died for all the sins of all people. That serious problem is hell. If Jesus atoned for all sins, just for what are the sinners in hell suffering? Those who seek to, quote, protect God's integrity by arguing that he must treat us all the same, end up accidentally affirming that God punishes the same sins twice, once on Calvary and again in hell. Some might object in turn to this rejoinder that the sinners in hell are being punished for their unbelief. But that too is a sin, and thus would have already, in Christ's suffering, if he suffered for all, it would have already been punished. If all sins have been atoned for, they can't be punished. Friends, God owes man nothing except damnation. What he chooses to give outside of damnation is all of grace, which means, in turn, that he treats his elect one way and the reprobate another, all to the everlasting praise of his glory. The value of the atonement, of course, is infinite. The purpose of the atonement, however, is specific. Well, when we were together last, if you were tuned in for our In the Beginning segment, I spent some time talking about a fundamental interpretive understanding, that when you want to understand what a text actually means, the first thing you have to do is seek to understand what the original audience heard, or would have heard likely from the original speaker. And that led us to consider what's going on when Moses is sharing this creation account with God's people in the wilderness. And that led me to the Hebrew word yom, which is translated days in our Bible. And I argued that while epic or era, because this is what I had believed as an older guy back in the day, is part of the semantic range of the word yom, it's not a common understanding, and it's not likely that that's what would have been heard, and that sort of pushed me into a young earth creation. Then the next point I wanted to make, I'm making here today, and it's simply this, that there's a reason. It's not just sort of hey, my intuition or my gut, or I have a hard time imagining. We don't do hermeneutics based on what the reader can imagine. But the truth is that while yom can mean a word beyond a 24-hour period, including an epic or an era, it is never in the whole of the Bible used in that non-literal way when it is accompanied by a ordinal number. An ordinal number. What's an ordinal number? Well, a cardinal number. These are the numbers we're a little more used to. 7 is a cardinal number. 2 is regular numbers are cardinal numbers. Probably precious few of you remember what ordinal numbers are, but probably all of you learned it. An ordinal number, you might guess from the sound of the word, is numbers in order. Cardinal numbers go 1, 2, 3. Ordinal numbers go 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. 7th, 8th, 9th. See, those are ordinal numbers. And each time an ordinal number, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or whatever it is connected to the word yom, in the Hebrew Bible, we know clearly in the context that it's talking about a literal 24-hour day. So there's no reason to impose on the use of yom here in Genesis 1 this weird alternate meaning. And in fact, once you just get these two basic points, again, I'm not an expert on this, but once you get these two basic points, you find yourself asking, well, how did we get away from this sound hermeneutic to embracing various and sundry old earth theories? Well, one of the ways that I'll concede has at least some hermeneutical ballast to it is that there are poetical things here in the creation. The framework hypothesis, which posits that we know this is poetry because the order of the first 3 days is the creation of a realm, and the order of the second 3 days is filling those realms with creatures of various sorts. That particular perspective is true, but I think it carries far more, or is asked to carry far more weight than it actually is equipped to do. It doesn't mean that this is not to be taken literally. In fact, the reality is that all language, whether it is prose or poetry, has prose elements and poetry elements in it. That is, if there was no prose element to poetry, it would be nonsense. And if there was no poetic element to prose, it would probably be math. It would, at the very least, come out very dry. But even that, see that word dry, words aren't actually wet or dry. So to describe language as being dry is to not use dry language. It is to use poetic language. So we use poetic language all the time without meaning that, hey, we're not trying to communicate something literal as well here. So that's what moved me. I thought, okay, I want to believe that when God speaks, and when I say when God speaks, I mean including thousands of years ago, that when God speaks through Moses, that what the people will hear is what he said, and that what I'm supposed to believe. And then I want to believe also that I do have sound hermeneutic principles, and I think that leads us all back to young earth. As for my light and stars issues, not surprisingly, there are a number of complex mathematical geospatial kind of theories that explain this that typically are pretty well above my pay grade, which again makes sense. I have no quarrel saying I don't know. I don't have to know. I know who does know. I know a God who can say, let there be light, and there's light, can bend space, can bend time. I mean, he made space, he made time. All these things are his. He can do it any way he wanted to do it. What I need to do is hear what he's saying. Now, this may not be the last time I touch on creation issues, and I don't want to lose you. If you're not a young earth person and you're listening in, I'm not going to browbeat you, and we're going to just go through this text. And I'm one of the reasons, the same reason I believe in young earth is the reason I don't believe that's the gist of what's going on here. I don't think that what the Hebrew people were hearing when Moses is giving this story is, here's how you're going to argue with the old earth people. Here's how you're going to argue with the evolutionists. I think he had other goals in mind. And so we're going to go back to those goals in the coming weeks. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.